In the last video, we talked about how you can make custom configurations for devices and metrics without having JavaScript proficiency. This is accomplished through something we call device definitions, and you interact with these device definitions through an application called Insight CM Console. We also made the comment that device definitions are not monolithic. They have been broken up into components to make their definitions more modular and to encourage reuse. So this diagram here shows the 6 components within a complete device definition and their relationships. We have the device component, the module component, the channel component, the unit component, then the metric component, and the metric instance component. So the idea here is that if you wanted to make a custom device that used all of the same modules and channel types that our standard device uses, then you could just customize the definition here in the device component and then leverage the existing module, channel, and unit components. And indeed, if they were going to calculate the same metrics, then we could leverage the same metric components as well. If you wanted to make a custom device that introduced a new channel type, then you could perhaps leverage the unit and the metric components and then just make a new device, module, and channel component. And finally, if you wanted to implement perhaps custom analysis but continue to use all of Insight CM's standard devices, you could change just the metric components and then leverage all of the definitions for the device themselves. So let's look at these components inside of the Insight CM console. So in the last video, we ran the Insight CM console list definitions -t-device, and this showed us all of the devices that are currently registered with the server. Well, we can do something similar for one of the other 5 components. One of them was module, so we can say list definitions of type module. And you can see these were all the modules that are supported by Insight CM, including the 9232, the 9230 for dynamic measurements, and pretty much the rest of these are for static measurements. These are voltages and thermocouples and currents, etc. And we can do the same thing for channels. Let's list all the definitions for type channel. And there's a lot of channel types that are natively supported by Insight CM. And again, the idea here is that if you're going to make your own channel type or your own module type, then you would use one of these existing types as a template to start with the general structure of the JSON string. And indeed, we can export one of these definitions, view their JSON string in an editor, and manipulate them like we did with a device. So let's show an example of that with this channel, the accelerometer channel. So I'm going to export the definition of type channel, this name, accelerometer 923X, and I'm going to export it to this JSON file. And this process should start to look similar. I'm going to open it up in Notepad. And this is a giant JSON string, just like the device was. And just like before, I don't really like interacting with the string in a Notepad text editor. So I loaded it up in JSON Editor Online, and now I have this nice tree that I can look at. And some of this stuff should look kind of familiar to you. We have layout groups and property definitions just like we did with the device. Just to kind of connect these concepts with our previous video, let's go back to the Systems Manager, look at the Channel tab. For the 923X channel type, we have all of these configuration options. Now, if you'll notice, there are 2 areas here with 2 clusters of configuration parameters. There's one here called Properties, and there's one here called Vibration Properties. Now, if we go back to the JSON definition for this channel type, you will see that there are 2 layout groups of the same type. And remember, if you have 2 layout groups of the same type, then they just get placed together one after the other. And indeed, under the property keys, you will see all of the same properties here as you saw on the web. So if your goal is to add, change, or modify configuration properties for a channel, you would manipulate the property keys inside one of these layout groups. Or maybe add even another layout group. And again, just like with the device, these properties are placed under layout groups, but they're defined under property definitions. So we have 13 properties here that are all defined under property definitions. So in the last two videos, we have examined the device component and now the channel component. So I want to go back to our diagram here, and I want to talk about how these components are linked together. When one component calls another component, that's when you're going to see one of these arrows here. So when we open up the device component, and I'll show this in just a minute, you will see references to modules and you'll see references to channels that are nowhere inside the device component. That's because that information has been declared in other components. Now metrics are handled a little bit differently. That's why I have this dotted line here down the middle. Now the reason why they're handled a little bit differently is because metrics can be run either on the device or on the server. So if a metric is handled on the device, then you will see the device code reference the metric component directly. However, if the metric is calculated on the server, then the device doesn't really need to know about it at all. So in those cases, there's a little bit looser association between the metric and the device. And this is done through keywords. And we're going to examine this more carefully in the next video. And in fact, I don't want to get hung up right now on the difference between a metric and an instance. We're going to examine that more closely in the next video as well. So right now, I just want to look at the device component and see some of this linking. So I've come back here to the 9068 device definition that we exported in the last video. And I just want to look at some of the sections in here, like for instance, channel group definitions. And you're going to see that out of all of these sections here, in the first two, you're going to see channel groups that are being defined by this device. And you're going to see things like this channel type in this first channel group is of type fixed speed. And down here in this group, you're going to see channel types of like accelerometer, single integrated, double integrated, velocities, and displacements. If you go through this entire JSON string, you're not going to see any definition for accelerometer or fixed speed. This is an example of how this device component is explicitly referencing another component, specifically the channel component, as we saw in that last diagram. We can see this by looking at the console. You can see both fixed speed here and accelerometer 923X, the double and single integrated versions of them. You can see all of those references are here as part of the channel definitions. Furthermore, we can see that here under calculated metrics, the 9068 does support onboard metric calculations. And when that is the case, the device needs to declare that. The device does need to declare, hey, I can calculate RMS online. So we don't need the server to do that. So you will see here, these are the 7 metrics that the 9068 supports in our standard devices. And so these are explicit references to the metric component that you saw in our graph or in that chart before. And then finally, here's a section that we've already examined. This is hardware definitions, and this declares what types of modules can be in our sockets that are part of the socket layout group. And you will see again references to the NI9232 and NI9230. These are again explicit references to module components. Now at this point, it's easy to get overwhelmed with just the sheer amount of information that's in these definitions. All I want you to take away from this video is that device definitions are very large and they're not monolithic. They're broken up into components, and these components refer to each other. And so you will touch different components in different use cases. So I would encourage you to refer to the video series where I implement some of these use cases. And you will see how to walk through the changing of these device definitions from beginning to end, which will depend on the use case that you're trying to implement.